Welcome, everyone, to the conference Contemporary Curating, Radical, Digital, Diverse. My name is Arjon Dunnewind, Director of IMPAKT, Center for Media Culture in Utrecht, the Netherlands. This conference is a public program organized by IMPAKT as part of our annual program. We're very happy to have so many people here in our portal, Planet IMPAKT. The Contemporary Curating Conference is connected to Full Spectrum Curatorship, IMPAKT's curatorial training program, so we're very happy that we also have the participants of this program in our event today. We would like to invite all of you to contribute to the discussion today. You can do so by emailing your questions or remarks to questions@impact.nl or by entering questions in the chat box of the Planet IMPAKT portal. The question and response option is open to everyone, and we invite you to use it whenever you feel like. Our moderator will hand over the questions to me, or to my fellow moderator today, Annet Dekker, who will be with us after the first panel. Let's start with a quick overview of today's program. Today we'll have 2 panels and 1 conversation. We'll open the conference with a panel on radicality and autonomy that I will introduce to you in a minute. We allocated 90 minutes for that panel, and after a short 15-minute break at 5:45 Central European Time, we'll have a conversation with Caroline Christoph Bakargiev, Director of Castello di Rivoli in Turin, Italy. For that we allocated 45 minutes. This is a bit shorter than announced, since Caroline needs to leave at 6:30. After our conversation with Caroline, we'll have a 60-minute break. At 7:30 Central European Time, we'll start the final part of today's conference, Curating the Internet, a panel we expect to take 90 minutes with Doreen Rios, Wade Wallenstein and Valentina Tanni, moderated by Annet Dekker. Both panels and the conversation will have a final part where we'll take audience questions for one of the speakers, and please let us know which speaker you want to take the question, or general contributions to the discussion. But feel free to also send in your questions before the start of these Q&A sections. So now let's jump to the first part of the conference, the panel on radicality and autonomy, with visual artist and curator and co-founder of the Athens Biennial, Poka Yo, and curator, writer, activist and director of the Niet Normaal INT Foundation, Ine Gevers. On radicality and autonomy is a panel advocating the freedom of art to be radical and controversial, but also seeing this in the context of current developments in the arts, culture and society. Mass media populism and the dynamics of social media's attention economy have changed our political and societal discourse. Online and offline, there are also successful examples of people making themselves heard, speaking truth to power, fighting against injustice, and celebrating inclusivity and diversity. How does the new societal and social media dynamic affect the arts? How can we deal with the moments when we experience friction between specific approaches to diversity and key values of the arts like ambiguity, irony, and subversiveness? How do we negotiate our positions as curators, artists, critics, to generate critical and productive conversations when working with controversial artworks and perspectives? Is there enough radicality and idiosyncrasy in contemporary art? How can art and academia contribute to important discussions in society and culture? We had hoped to have this panel with 3 speakers, also including Dutch artist Renzo Martens. I wanted to invite Renzo Martens since I feel that the discussions that his work have been provoking are at the core of what we want to address in this panel. His works have received very different responses. I see them as inspiring, thought-provoking, and confusing sometimes. I remember reading mixed responses to his film Enjoy Poverty, accusations of exploitation on the one hand, praise for his radical approach to Western hypocrisy on the other. I remember reading students complaining about his chocolate sculptures, missing, in my opinion, the point of his project, Institute of Human Activities, that shows, among others, that under the umbrella of established Western artists like Renzo Martens, your work as an African artist can suddenly become valuable and headline material. It is my perception that ambiguity and provocation are deliberately chosen tools in the artistic practice of Renzo Martens. in his strategies to expose and discuss the mechanisms of the art world, press photography, the news industry, aid work, and our society at large. I was delighted that Renzo accepted my invitation. However, 10 days ago, I received an email from Renzo Martens saying that he wanted to withdraw from the panel. He noticed that our conference was announced as radical, digital, diverse, while the accompanying picture only showed what he described as white people. Feeling uncomfortable with this, he asked us to take his name and picture from the program. While I thought I understood his concerns, I also felt that his assessment of the situation wasn't completely right, maybe. The panel that I invited Renzo for, the one that will start in just a few minutes, is not about diversity itself, or diversity alone, but about the moments where specific approaches to achieving more diversity can create friction with what I see as another important mission for the arts, and that is to be radical, to allow itself to be uncomfortable, ambiguous, and controversial. Also, I argued that we need to approach diversity in many ways, along cultural background and ethnicity, looking at gender, political diversity, neurodiversity, etc. I feel totally okay when people looking at the overall track record of IMPAKT to comment on how we are doing in terms of diversity. But I also feel it's not constructive to judge each individual program from this perspective. Renzo Martens' comments, however, did make me reconsider the panel and think of persons of color that I could add. The time was limited, and unfortunately, the new speaker I invited turned out to be not available, unfortunately. And before it was clear that this additional speaker was not available, Renzo made it clear this would not change his position, and we agreed that he would withdraw from the panel. It does feel ironic that someone that I perceive to be very much at the part of this discussion I hope to have today, and a person whose intentions are often misinterpreted, has withdrawn from the panel. However, I do understand his consideration and respect his decision. What I hope to discuss in this panel with our two guests today is how we as curators, artists and audiences can deal with art that is controversial and uncomfortable maybe. When provocative is good, as in thought-provoking and stirring discussions that are needed, and when it's done from a safe position, for effect's sake, only at the expense of others, or damaging for those who are most vulnerable. When are provocations and radicality qualities of art? How can we combine these qualities with the struggle for diversity? How are these assessments different when you can take them from a safe position, for instance, that of a white Western curator? How do we respond when being criticized, not only from directions we are maybe used to, religion, bourgeois morale, conservatism, but also from directions that we are sympathetic to, supportive of, and consider ourselves part of? To which extent do we as audiences, artists and curators want to accept, tolerate, or actively include points of view that we maybe do not agree with, but that we can still value as important voices in the spectrum of opinions that an inclusive and respectful debate should have in an open, democratic society? I do realize that these are a lot of very difficult questions, and we'll never be able to deal with all of them, and I do not expect my guests to address all of them. But I'm very happy to be here with two curators that I value for their radical and inclusive approach to curating. Two curators I feel have never shied away from controversy, but have used the thought-provoking qualities of art as a way to raise important questions and stir debates we need in our society today. So after these opening words and explanations, it's time to get started with our first speaker, Ine Gevers. Ine Gevers is a curator, writer and activist. She's the director of the Niet Normaal INT Foundation, and she has curated and organized large-scale exhibitions on topical issues in various cities in the Netherlands. Early exhibitions include Niet Normaal, Differences on Display in 2009, and more recent exhibitions are Impossible Bodies in 2020 and Fake Me Hard in 2021. This summer she will present the exhibition Come Alive here in Utrecht. She's the editor and author of numerous publications like Beyond Ethics and Aesthetics, Difference on Display, Yes Naturally and Hacking Habitat. Ine Gevers, welcome. We're curious to see and hear your presentation. So please, Ine, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Arjon, for inviting me. Is the sound okay? Yes, perfect. Yeah, and thank you, audience. I will quickly run through about 30 years of work in 15 minutes, so I hope that that's going to work. And it will be a tour in layers to allow myself to have some associations along the way. The following structure might help for you. I have 3 routes actually that come together the whole time when I do the presentation. And that kind of, help you keep track of my possibly messy presentation sometimes. As the one layer, I could say, is art theoretical. The second one is personal, which equates political for me. And the third one is a practice-based, like what is then actually happening in the exhibitions themselves. So this first slide is just for me a reminder, because it's Hannah Arendt's quote was one that we already used in the 90s for the Ik en Ander exhibition. I'm now going to the next slide, sorry. Yeah. Yes, so the Ik en Ander exhibition, that was in 1994 in Amsterdam. And actually, I have to say something more about the 3 tracks that I just mentioned. One track is called the art theoretical, is actually a position that I have been taking in for a long time. And that position is that artists cannot claim autonomy, and musea and art institutions cannot claim neutrality, as we are always embedded in the ideology of our times, or to quote Zizek, we're always part of the unknown knowns, which is for me very important. These are the silent presuppositions we are not aware of, but that nonetheless determine our acts. And of course, like if you look at history, whether it was a church, the colonial traders in the 17th century, the avant-garde of the 20th century, or the neo-avant-garde after that, the ongoing quest of connecting art and society, of creating artworks that really make a difference in real life, has always failed and will fail again, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, by the way. There's never been a golden age, nor for academia, nor for the arts, when complete freedom of speech was ours. Well, and there's so many examples, but I now come back to the PowerPoint and be more concrete. For instance, here, what I tried to do for Ik en Ander was create a context, as I think that curating is all about creating context. It's the most important thing that we can do, allowing for different voices to be heard at the same time. And for Ik en Ander, we made a collaboration with the Red Cross. Actually, it was a way for me to address the so-called neutrality of the white cube, which was in the 90s still very valid, certainly in the Netherlands, but elsewhere as well, of course. And the Red Cross in its own, also an institute claiming neutrality, actually, during the First World War and the Second World War, etc. So here you see a slide with different works. You might recognize it's Cindy Sherman, it's Christina Borland, but the one that I want to pay attention to is Adrian Piper. Adrian Piper you see in the corner, and the work actually was titled Cornered. And Adrian Piper is a very, very interesting person that kind of influenced me a lot in thinking about identity politics. As a young artist, or even before she became an artist, was a black woman, is still a black woman, passing for white, meaning many, many people saw her as a white person instead of the black person that she came from and that she embraced. And of course, only later, when becoming older, she understood what had happened, what she had been doing, and she played with that all along in all her artworks. we go back to the slide again. There were many, many very critical and provocative works here. You can imagine Cindy Sherman there with the very explicit photographs. We're still talking about the Red Cross organization that we worked with. But next, oh, I'm going to the next slide. Yeah, sorry. This is, yeah, next slide. And of course, many others. But the critique that we received on this exhibition that was at that time in the Netherlands really another way of focusing on the world, really, and on the place that artists could take in that world, was actually what you see here. You see here that we had a curatorial intervention, you could call. It's a photograph of United Colors of Benetton and a photograph of Trouw having a picture of Anne Frank. And the critique at that show was that we as curators made this intervention and it looked too much like a Hans Hake thing, and we couldn't do that because, you know, whatever, we as curators shouldn't take the role of an artist or should be neutral, whatever reason. Well, for us, both of us, me and Jeanne van Heeswijk, we did this together. It was like crucial because when we had in the whole exhibition many more cultural artifacts, so not only artworks, but when we only had the poster of the United Colors of Benetton, it was so strong, it just blew away the different artworks in that space, which was for us, of course, that was not the intention at all. And that's why we created this work, which exactly did what it should do. It kind of, how do you say that? It kind of, you know, diminished the visual effect, and it opened up for discussion, for the economic. Well, that's that show specifically. There's another thing, I'll go back to the slides. There's another thing that is, that was really important for me for Ik en Ander, and that's the whole notion of identity politics. I think that in between Ik en Ander and the next one, the Niet Normaal exhibition, there has been stuff in between, but there's also been a personal versus political intervention in my life. That's something that I wanted to talk about as well. So before I start with the Niet Normaal, I'll tell you a bit about that. So as a person, I am much lesser privileged than my looks and position could make you believe. I am a white woman, able-bodied, cisgender, highly educated, and identifying as queer, passing for straight. But that's not all. That's just like a first, a positioning, I could say. But let's say that I have experienced a tough learning curve in my personal life that made me develop survival tactics, really survival tactics. I'm not exaggerating here, that allowed me to connect with others across differences. I didn't understand how that would work when I had these tough times. It had to do with my children, the survival tactics that actually made me choose sides within disabled discussion for the disabled, and me becoming a disability activist. But it was also the basis actually of my risk-taking adventures as a self-employed curator, researcher, writer and activist, with a lot of appreciation for differences among humans and non-humans. I now go back to slides again. I just wanted to tell you that because it's like all these three lines. So the art theoretical, the personal political, and the practice-based kind of. I need to go back once more. Swap. I can do that. Sorry. So the Niet Normaal exhibition actually was really an attempt to go beyond identity politics. That was something that, of course, came to me also because of what I experienced as a person, but also because of being informed by texts from Donna Haraway and Alain Badiou specifically, like how to become a subject, how to become not an identity, but becoming a subject while following your own truth when life happens to you, and it gives you certain glasses to look through at the world. The Niet Normaal exhibition actually was trying to turn the tables in many, many ways, especially by questioning the ableist position of the general public, the public that kind of came in and saw itself as normal and even natural. And we did that, for instance, by this first work, which was a large table with all the pills that people swallow from their like birth on until death. And the males on the one hand side and the women on the other side, because that really is a big difference between these curves of this pill taking. But anyhow, it was one of it were among the first works that made clear in this whole Niet Normaal exhibition that when you ask a question like what is normal and who decides, normality is a construct, and of course, so people who many times kind of, taken a very ableist position or position that seeing themselves as normal or natural, while forgetting about the many ways in which they are enabled to become healthy with pills and with the makeovers, but also using their companion species. We always forget about the companion species is a typically Donna Haraway term, actually. So some people use glasses, another person uses how do you say that? A stick to lean on, and another one needs another person because this person cannot fully autonomously make decisions or cross through life. So and except for that, there's also neurodiversity among all of us, and not just like a typical neurologically typical group of people and other people that divert from that. Within the whole exhibition, technology actually was the context. Go again, next one. Oh, now it's not working anymore. So somebody needs to, yeah, okay. There we are. Well, I expected, actually, I could just give you a few works, because this one, Thomas Hirschhorn, was actually a work that I expected to be really controversial, because remember, this was an exhibition, the Niet Normaal, again, collaborating with non-art institutions, like the Raad voor Chronisch Zieken en Gehandicapten, for instance, like the Board of People with Disabilities and Chronic Illness. And this work of Thomas Hirschhorn, Outgrowth Family, which is really a critique on, like how we bring that in the headlines and how we kind of, turn people into objects, really, to making fun of, but also like, to attract attention in a way. So that was really a work that I thought, well, I will get the whole community over me, but that didn't happen. As didn't the next one, which was because actually the whole notion of how we look at normality versus difference at that time, but we still do, is of course it's intersectional. So notions of cultural background, of color, of ability versus disability, etc., of course intersect with each other, even in the small moments of like 5 minutes or an hour that we talk to each other. These positions change, and I think this fluidity is the most important thing that we should keep, the changing of that. But anyhow, within the exhibition I showed, of course, that also language is a technology and a way we stereotyped different people, but also this one was not the one that made, oh no, I'm going too far, made reaction. The reaction came from this Mark Quinn, which was also the Mark Quinn sculpture, which was also on the poster, and NS refusing to have these posters in the station. And that was a real riot, with demonstrations, and also the government needing to explain themselves over this positioning of the railway station. From the Niet Normaal, it was for me quite a natural step towards Yes Naturally, which was in 2013 in The Hague, as the feminist, materialist, and relational approach of before, at the Niet Normaal exhibition, helped me to appreciate more and more the existence of human and non-human agencies, defining actually who we are and what we can become. So the concept of Yes Naturally was really based on that, and the show tried to carefully introduce the Anthropocene as a context while proposing multiple ways to open up to others, human and non-human, actually to allow a lesser anthropocentric worldview, which is really, really difficult because we are human beings and we are kind of constructed or made to look at the world from that very specific perspective. It was still, of course, interesting to stretch up the limits of this anthropocentric worldview. So Yes Naturally was not a plea to go back to nature. There's no such a thing as an objectified nature without us being part of it. But it embraced technology as a necessary tool to overcome our own limits. So this was a really interesting kind of, how would you say that, for many people, difficult to understand position, because it was not binary. It was not, okay, we choose for this, so we are against the other. And we still think that we need technology in relation to climate change, to pollution, brutal extraction of resources, etc. So now I'll show you some slides. One is this one, which was a collaboration with a co-creation with many people from the surroundings, from repair cafes till sheltered workshops, all to bring all these elements together in a work that was called Affall Holders, or like heroes made of rubbish, and it actually pollutes society, and but also gives us stories, and stories that help us to do a better job in relation to the planet as a whole. Another one that also for me was very, very critical, but did not, this is really the story of my life, so the ones that actually, the works that I think these really say something are mostly not the works that kind of, become like a topic. This next one. No, I'm going too far now, sorry. Topic of discussion. The topic of discussion in the press, and with again demonstrations against the show, had to do with this work from Pierre Week, Zoudrem, which was actually an installation with a living hermit crab finding his home in this mask, and this crab, during the half year of the show, died. For two crabs died. And of course, we really took it seriously, and in the end, we didn't listen to the artist anymore, and just selected a smaller crab for the third time, and that one survived. The crab was just too big for the mask to stay in, and of course, then you cannot sleep, and you have sensory overload also as a crab, I suppose. So we kind of, found out what was the problem, but it's just very interesting for you to see that it can be really different what you imagine that is important or provocative and what actually is happening. The same was also for the Hacking Habitat show, which for me was a natural extension of Yes Naturally, and the context this time was globally connected high-tech systems and how these, when not counteracted upon, allow for existing structural violence to amplify and spread. So it was not just talking on the level of privacy and integrity. It was had the exhibition took place in a prison, and it talked about iPhones and smartphones as a new panopticon in an increasing mass surveillance society. It made connections with other forms of structural violence as well. For instance, this one, such as extraction of human and non-human resources, but also neocolonialism, fascism, and more. Like, for instance, this one is Fernando Sanchez Castillo, and this is actually the boat on which Hitler he had his fests and small gatherings there on this boat, and it was later reiterated by fascist movements who kind of saw that as a token of fascism again. And so he broke it down, and it was here in the middle of the chapel. So he also connected Catholicism, religion, Catholicism, and fascism there. But this also didn't reach the public. What in the end, was the problem for, especially in my eyes, not really investing art critic from the NRC, was this work from Claire Pentecost. That was, in my eyes, the most kind of one-liner you could imagine. The work, it was different cages with coals, with coal materials for breasts, and the title already shows it, for the body without organs to sense. And the canary is, of course, the canary in the coal mines, and that we as human beings not sensing anymore what is happening to us in relation to climate change and so many other violence, structural violence things that we allow ourselves to happen. So the whole issue became this canary, and whether we could do that, lock it up, and whether we had thought of a good life of this canary after the exhibition. Just to give you another example, robot love was the next one. Again, robot love actually was very much coming back to Hacking Habitat and seeking in a more affirmative way how to embrace the love that we share for another in terms of trouble. So when we are in such a technological age with robots and AI all over, how can we then still stick together and come up with what you could call a human feedback that allows for diversity? So that is what we tried to do for robot love. I'll just give you a few examples. This one, because I just love it. So what I mostly do, by the way, is always also allowing for diversity in all its elements, but bringing it through the flanks. So not kind of labeling it and making a big issue of it, but just make it happen. Just show, don't tell. That's the story, I think, of my life. Although sometimes this happens, of course, for instance, with Tiffany Dinkins, who had this beautiful conversation with Bina 48, which was really about the bias of robotics, of algorithms and AI, because this Tiffany Dinkins, being black, etc., was not at all, how would you say that, aware of the whole system and the context she was born into, which is really interesting, of course. I'm almost there, sorry, almost there. But the big issue was actually the campaign poster, that made people fall over, and how could we do that, etc. I'm just giving. So I'm going now to the last exhibition, and then I'm finished. And In reference to hacking habitat, really, Fake Me Hard at again, Fake Me Hard, which was last year in Rotterdam. Fake Me Hard at a much more dystopian look and feel. I co-curated this with Kees de Groot from Planet Art. And the dystopian look and feel with a glance of hope, again, on collective civil disobedience, to which many artworks that we included alluded. It was all about fake news, deep fakes, the physical world in our context, and of course, again, the violence in this digital world that makes the crossover so easily. Algorithms are far from neutral, and business models based on the strong emotions we feed them are neither. And we are making a way for a completely corporate controlled society, oligarchy actually, so society. So lots of elements were there that were very, again, controversial or critical, but even this was just lovely, like Mary Magic, housewives living, making drugs was really a way of how could I say that, an example of civil disobedience, although the discussion was about whether or not including John Raffman in the show because of a possible Me Too connection. So you see that whatever like large topics you as a curator, put into upfront, it's how it's received and how people react. It needs really an investment from, and of course I'm not saying in general, because I wouldn't still make exhibitions if there was no response at all. There is, but in general, I find it also very amusing and interesting that it's like almost never that you can predict what is happening in the field.
Thanks a lot, Ine. A lot of food for thought. Amazing artists and art projects also, and I think we'll discuss your three-layer approach also when we talk with Poka when he joins us. Was also triggered by you yourself positioning yourself as a disability activist. I think it's also interesting to see how we combine. How we can see the combination of curator and activists. So we'll get back to that in the discussion after Poka's presentation. Because now I would like to introduce Poka Yo to you. Poka Yo is an artist, curator, consultant and coach. He was born and lives in Athens. Poka Yo's diverse artistic work comprises painting, performances, theater, film and curating. He is Associate Professor and Director of Lab 12 of Expanded Media at the Athens School of Fine Arts. He's founding director of the Athens Biennial and head of Onassis Culture, unit of visual culture. Poka Yo has been working as a consultant for organizations and companies since 2004 and as a coach since 2013. An expanded set of practices blended in his art. His main work, thematic and key narrative, is the perpetual oscillation between attraction and aversion and the fall of the culture of desire. Poka Yo, it's great to have you here from Athens. I'm looking forward to your presentation. Poka, the floor is yours. We can't hear you yet. Maybe you hold just for a second, Poka. I'm trying to fix the audio. Could you try it again, Poka? Sorry? You might be muted at your end. Could you check that? No, Poka, his end. It should be okay now. Could you refresh, Poka? That might solve it. Is that an option for you, refreshing?
Is it better now?
We've got sound, super.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, dear audience, for being here on a late Saturday afternoon. This is going to be a slightly different presentation. I'm a visual artist and I work with images. That images are my world. Nevertheless, I chose not to bring images here because I believe that what we are about to say has not to do with our personal practice, our armory of images, and our history, but also the battleground moves, extends far from visuals to the realm of ideas, and more specifically to the realm of beliefs and ideology. Aaron started his presentation earlier by mentioning the ambiguity and irony and how these two are currently under, I would say, questioning. We are facing, as curators, more and more a pressure not to work with irony, not work with provocation, not to work with over-identification, as this would mean that we kind of uh, get on the side of the conservative. And this is my main premise for today. The name of my talk is Breakwater. I believe for those who, some of us who were maybe we are more or less of the same age, born in the 70s, raised in the 80s, we believed that there's some kind of forward in history, and our work could be perceived as avant-garde of sorts. For some reason, though, we see that in the last decades, we are moving into a retrograde direction. Modernity and also capitalism are failing us or have failed us dearly. And this ends to some kind of, I would say, disenchantment. A disenchantment that was very obvious to the place that I am living in, Greece, a relatively young democracy within Europe, that was hardly hit by the crisis of the last 10 or short years. Disenchantment has deprived of the younger generation of the sense of future. My students and young artists and young people of the age of 19 to, I would say, close to 35 now, have lost a sense of a cause of where they are going to. And that has led to a lot of anger and bitterness. Why I'm bringing this topic here is because the last years, the topic of the Athens Biennale, which I happen to be the co-founder and artistic director, has been dealing with this phenomena, the phenomena of reaction. The previous Biennale was called Anti, and this was called Eclipse, the one that just finished. Since I haven't brought any images deliberately here, just seek out what we have been doing, follow the Athens Biennale in the media to just so you can get a sense of what we are doing, which is, of course, rather spectacular, visually spectacular, and I don't think that it comes out well in a presentation. This disenchantment and anger, I would say, brings us to what I would call, sorry, a systemic meltdown. I believe there is a time now that we have lost faith in the system, but also the system collapses internally, meaning that there's no sense of integrity, of truth, of wholesomeness. The political system has been, especially in many places of the South, but also I would say the whole of Europe. I don't even go to the other side of the ocean to the States because there it's almost also much more evident. We have lost our trust in our system, and this system expands through universities. As I'm teaching in a university, to the art world, to museums, art centers, etc. I am now gonna be referring to the art world as a place of constant conflict. Being raised in the 80s, there was a sense of continuous, I would call it evolution, a belief that through what was still evident late modernity, we could possibly find a better future. Um, by collapsing this sense of uh, future, also other systems started to collapse. One of those is the system of the circulation of art. Galleries, collections, art fairs, and museums became even more systematic about how they used to circulate art, and that became also its, I would say, its condemnation, its pitfall. Because by becoming even more commercial, by standardizing the processes, they became more irrelevant. They became more of a commodity and therefore lost the connection with the broader public and also the vast majority of the artists who found their way that was not included in this system. Therefore, we came to have what I say parallel markets. And when I say markets, I believe that currently we are having at least three, four distinctive parallel circulation panels in art. What is that? The art market, the secondary market, then the biennial and perennial exhibitions circuit that exchanges works that are based on values, based on political thematic premises, on issues of identity, gender, race, post-colonialism, etc. And then we have newly found other territories, such as the circulation of digital art and all this world that is this newly established bubble of the NFTs, etc. I specifically am going to be focusing on the panel of the terrain of this alternative, I would say, market, which is based on different values, not monetary values, but values that have to do with the real meaning of value, with humanitarian values and built on political thematic premises. I believe that this kind of terrain is highly problematic because, in a way, it circulates and replicates a different kind of working that becomes like I use the term meltdown, this internal collapsing of what art at least used to be. We are talking, and coming from the academia myself, we see that now in the art world, what reigns is not creative thinking. It's what we call critical thinking. Critical thinking and the distinctions between those two, for those interested, you can search them online. I believe there are so many different examples of that, are so different. In critical thinking, we want to demonize. We want um, to take out of grace what is already established, and to reinstate or to instate different examples. And you hear, for example, in the critics in art schools, for example, how everyone is not building to the idea of other creators, fellow creators, but basically tries to negate them. This negation, this constant negation, I believe leads to what I would bring here as a constant reaction. We are conditioned since the days of our art school to build on negation, to reaction instead of action. And by doing so, we are becoming, we believe that we are doing that, and by thus we are becoming radical, progressive, political, or whatever. In fact, we are perpetuating an internal, self-agonizing, uh, defensive, and also highly introspective, I would say, trait that is, of course, endemic, intrinsic in arts, but at the same time, this makes it its own toxic microclimate, its own toxic trait. Um, Reaction, we see that in young artists and also older artists of our age, is becoming something like a new ideological banner. And biennials and many exhibitions currently are looking more and more like crusades for a cause. The cause comes first, the theme comes second. Coming from Greece, even some decades ago, after the Second World War, and when we had the Cold War, my ancestors, and that was a very common thing, were asked to, not particularly my family, but people around me, were asked to sign declarations or statements of political beliefs, meaning they, in order to go, for example, and work for the public sector, they had to state of their political positioning. To put it bluntly, they were not communists, and that was enough. Now we see that more and more we, as curators and artists, we are asked, or we feel inclined to state where we are standing in the political spectrum. My respected colleague before stated her status as an activist. We feel that we need to state that because it's something of visiting card, of our entry passport to this world, but also like a safety net of where we are standing. We I see many artists working in that, and the biennial and other exhibitions that I have worked with dealt with political issues, like, for example, the influx of migrants and the crisis of the Aegean and the crimes that are now taking place in the Aegean. People are drowning, etc., on the borders of Europe. Impact is in the Netherlands, but we are on the fringe of Europe where things are really different. They are accelerating, and humanism is not a concept. It's something that is constantly and daily contested. Many of those artists are becoming from defenders of these themes to exploiters. They're using metrics and KPIs in their exhibitions in the sense of how many migrants have benefited from their actions, how many migrants and refugees have been engaged in the process. And by listening to them presenting their work, the most I started getting afraid that what we were doing, me as I said, as a moderator, as a curator of that, an agent of these actions, I started feeling dread that we are multiplying something like a humanitarian exploitation. And by doing so, by becoming more aware of our strength as political subjects, not just as artistic subjects, and by having the agency of our own media and our own media structure ourselves, we are able to use that for different means. In the sixth Athens Biennale, an artist, a political artist, has been quarreling with another socialist, also socialist political artist online. At some point before the Biennale, the first artist says that if you blackmail the organization by saying, if you do not exclude this second artist from the Biennale, I will withdraw. I consider this artist conservative, although, as I said, a socialist, proven socialist, and also I consider this artist and anti-Semitic. Also, these artists both are Jews, both are very active politically Jews. So, from a personal quarrel in internet, in Twitter, then there is a huge spillover in the media, and the first artist not only withdraws from the Biennale, but also tries to cancel the fund and defund the Biennale on the premises that supports an anti-Semitic artist, which was nothing of sorts. So you see that this kind of eye for an eye is becoming something like a new kind of, I would say, political or artistic practice that makes it even more toxic, our environment. Artists do know, I'm an artist myself, we all know our power. We all know that we have the means now and the awareness to sabotage big museums, to cancel exhibitions on any possible matter. Maybe that is the funds and where this museum is funded from, and maybe of the inclusion of an artist or the exclusion of another artist. Some very just a few months from now, I had a discussion with fellow curators and about an exhibition, and we were discussing the inclusion of Renzo Martens in this exhibition, which is focusing on black art, and also on post-colonial and diversity issues. I'm just broadly bringing this up now. The fellow curators say that no, Renzo Martins cannot be in this exhibition. He's white, he's been exploitative, he doesn't have a place in this exhibition. I was very eager to support that, especially Renzo Martins brings these issues openly in his art, and we need that kind of provocation. We need that kind of ambiguity in order to tap on the hypocrisy of today's cultural foundations. And the answer was no. Today, Renzo Martins was supposed to be in this panel with us, and he chose not to be because it was not inclusive enough. So you see how ambiguity kind of derails our work and deludes also our vision and maybe fogs our intention. By ending, I would say that this is not something. This current is not something that is about to end soon. This retrograde movement is not going to end soon. This is a new era that we have entered, and it will stay for at least a couple of decades more. The way I'm seeing that, I would ask you to think twice about canceling practices and how they are deployed. Seek always the truth, because the truth is not on the headlines. The headlines are explicitly good in concealing intentions and concealing real information. And in order to start canceling again, we have to go, which we should reimagine foundations. We should reimagine how things operate in art and in culture in general. But before we do that, I think we should first of all challenge our own tools, our own weapons, and the canceling tools that we currently have are two-edged swords that are cutting from both sides, very painful, that can cause a lot of pain in every side, and not to mix radicality with reaction. As a professor in the School of Fine Arts, I thought I would establish, in the 4 years that I'm now a professor, that I would establish something like a new avant-garde, especially in a place that is so much needed like Athens. With all this negativity that's been accumulating in the last years, and the anger of the younger generation, what I'm currently trying to be, and what I'm urging you to be as practitioners of art and of culture, is to become breakwaters, to become that kind of construction that will become something like a buffer and stop the current of violence and of chaotic negation that goes all the way. That is from me now. I'm happy to discuss it.
Super. Thanks, Poka. Thanks for your presentations without visuals, but nevertheless, I think very inspiring. Thanks a lot. I suggest that we also get Ine in the frame. There you are. Welcome, Ine, also. Welcome back. Again, people in the audience, we're open to get your questions. We're already getting some questions in. You can ask them in the chat, or you can scan the QR code that you can see now. What we could maybe start with is this statement, Ine, that you made, that you considered yourself a disability activist. And I'm very curious, already announced, how it is to be an activist and a curator, how these two can combine. One problem I see, to be honest, is that as an activist, you don't want to be misunderstood. As a curator, you might want to include artists that allow themselves to be ambiguous. So there's maybe a bit of tension there. Also, we could look at what Poka just said, that in his case, I think, as if I quote you wrong, Poka, it seems like being such a statement could be seen as a visiting card, an entry passport, a statement that you have to make about where you're standing. I can totally understand, Ine, that's not how you see it, but I would be very curious how your response or what your response to this is. So maybe we start there. It also connects with, I think, with a question we had from the audience, from Alora. So let's start with these questions.
To whom are you now addressing?
Well, Ine, maybe starting with a specific question. Do you see a tension between having activist approaches and being a curator? One maybe needing to allow ambiguity, irony, and the other activism where maybe you don't want to be misunderstood, a message has to be clear.
Well, I don't see that. Well, there are frictions, sure. I made that clear, I think, also in the the slides that I showed. But can I see you all? It's really strange to look at myself. Yeah, perfect. Well. So one of the things I've always been doing, also informed by what I was saying, a more art theoretical approach, knowing that avant-gardes in fact never have succeeded completely to connect art and life, although we constantly try, is being very clear in my statement as a curator in the context that I create for different artists and different voices, but also ambiguity and over-identification and provocation, because that is part of the whole package in my idea. So making a context clear is, in my opinion, completely the opposite of presenting yourself as neutral. But the aspects that that Poka is now bringing to the fore are, of course, very relevant. But I think also really relevant to, especially on the one hand, you do that because you position it in Greece, you position it in a context where lots of things has been happening on the humanitarian front. That's very clear. On the other hand, what we see is a larger context in which actually we have a new vector class, the ones that the Googles and the Amazons, etc., that it's a kind of a capitalism plus area that we are in, and also identity politics that's becoming co-opted by the right, actually, which is a very interesting tool, of course, to damage control, to get us all into a fight instead of a collaboration. And I think there is, so I really agree with your point. I do not see the activist stance as opposite to the possibility of allowing many voices. And it might be, I think it might be even, I would say, a feminine fluency that allows me to be able to do that. But yeah, again, I think it's, but I will do that every time. I think it's our duty to be as sharp and as articulate as we can be, which also means positioning ourselves as curators. Like, who are we? Where do we come from? What is your perception? And from there, of course, also allowing works that counteract or that, because otherwise I wouldn't do my job. Simple.
Poka, maybe you could respond to Ine's position here.
can't say much more than to agree with Ines. We should take into consideration the different context, even the different context within the European Union. For example, I am a person and also the co-founders of the Athens Biennale by heart, which are, I would call, rebellious by heart. Let's call it like that. But being young and growing up in a place that has total lack of institutions and of ways to channel our work and support our work, there is no support mechanism for contemporary art in Greece. I thought, and we thought back then, in 16 years ago, that the most controversial and the most radical thing to do would be to establish a foundation. If
I
we
get
had
that. Yeah.
Yeah. If we had a foundation like that, a biennial or a contemporary art museum or contemporary art center back then, by heart, we would most probably, as our fellow peers, would be critical standing against that. But since we didn't have that, we felt that the most radical thing would be to initiate something like that. So this is, as you understand, much different from the situation in the Netherlands.
I like that so much that you say this, Poka, because actually you, for me, kind of affirm the necessity, of having an institution while everything has fallen down and collapsed. For me, it's it's really opposite. I like actually because of institutions and systems having the tendency to kind of talk for themselves, like to defend their own existence, are in my eyes problematic to start with. So which is actually the reason why I am a self-employed curator still and never have been building my institution. But the context here is different. At least it was for a long time. So I have always find a way to take those risks, to take highly financial risk as well, but being in a situation that I could handle that. For you, that's a completely different. And I really have to think about the conference that I made in '89, which was called Cultural Identity, Fiction or Necessity, ? And that had everything to do with this, because when something is taken from you, or you are not granted any identity or a cultural identity or a free space, to work in, then of course that becomes your most important survival thing. That is what you need then. On the other hand, we still need to also really consider notions of identity, as they are much too strict at this moment. Actually, you could say there is no such thing as identity, and if there is, there's plural, many for each person. So, but it's I find it interesting because you see how it complicates, and by the way, you also really articulate that specific context, which is so important for you to really want to start with creating the very conditions for art to thrive. So yeah, I really can follow you there.
Poka, I think just a few lines ago, you describe yourself as a rebel by nature, if I'm not mistaken, and very much how you see that, maybe that coming from what you painted as your background in the 80s, and then calling contemporary biennials, big exhibitions, crusades. In a way, there is a similarity. I mean, maybe you were on a crusade against certain values that you did not agree with. Now we see these exhibitions, you described them as crusades. Where's the difference? Why do you see one positive, and I take it from the context of what you told, the current day crusades as problematic?
I think it's impossible to escape this thing. We, at least the present people here and the coming curators, we are kind of integral chains in this construction. So even if we're criticizing that, we cannot really escape that. Either we abide by the norms of the market, of the art market, which is something that we are, it's, I would say, uninteresting to us to that extent, to be totally submissive to the to what the art market wants, or we kind of join forces in this open battlefield of ideas and beliefs, although we understand that this is also problematic in its own way. Therefore, I think this is it's contradictory by nature, and I understand that, and we are very much willing to contribute in this contradiction ourselves by daily trying to make sense of what seems chaotic and nonsensical. We are also trying to make sense of this construction, which is the art, what we call the art world.
Ine, I think in the beginning of your presentation, you said there is no autonomy and there is no neutrality. I think what I find personally difficult as a curator is that, well, understanding that you come from a very privileged position, maybe in the Netherlands even more than in Greece, with good cultural infrastructures, and in Greece again being more privileged than about all of the rest of the world, where there are even less cultural infrastructures. And the difficulty for me is then to imagine yourself without these privileges and then take decisions, because somehow you always have to take decisions. You can say, okay, this is my limited perspective as someone with a certain upbringing, with a certain background. But okay, where does it bring you then? You cannot simply disqualify yourself, or you could and say, I'll stop being a curator, I'm not qualified to do it. But still, if you feel that if I'm not doing it, no one else will be doing it, and you decide to continue, how are you able to take your decisions, still realizing yourself the limitations of the perspectives that you have connected to the position that you're in? How do you go about that? Ine, maybe you start with that.
Well, very interesting question. You know, the context we work and live in, you know, we're kind of, you know, profiled by algorithms. We are really pushed in all manners possible to color within the lines. We, through algorithms and AI, get to understand more and more that we as human beings are not the only agents. You know, that's of course also what's happening. The whole notion of free will is like on its, how would you say that, it's completely attacked in every way. We all know, you know, that there's the bacteria and viruses in our bodies kind of take over fully, but still, I find that a very interesting context also to work in. And this is not just theoretical. When I tell you, or when I start this position like there's no autonomy, that does not mean that we need to do not fight for that. That does not mean that we should not every day again try to make the right decisions for us to become a subject, relating to other subjects, to be able to become with other people across differences. All that stuff, of course, remains. It's not, autonomy can never be a given. And you know, so in the context of the Netherlands or Europe or also the United States, many times that was the positioning, that it's a given, that just as soon as you have your diploma, you know, you don't have to think anymore because you are this artist. I don't believe that. I believe that we really, really need to strive to become, and that is a very important thing. And then also, by the way, yeah, I love Gertrude Stein in this. Gertrude Stein, who was a feminist theorist of the 19th century, who had this beautiful quote like, "Why there are so little masterpieces?" And then she says, "And the most difficult thing is there aren't just a few masterpieces, but these masterpieces need to be made while knowing that there is no such thing as identity. I know that I'm complicating things here. It doesn't mean that you don't want to grow or don't want to know and don't want to make those decisions as, from your own ethical and morals perspective. By the way, again, really allowing for over-identification, for humor, for irony, because I think humor, and especially self-irony, is the most important thing within the art world. You do that too little, we are just human beings, nothing more. Even if I have this position to be a curator, so anyhow, sorry for that.
Poka, any response to the passionate plea of Ine?
I have to say that I identify with Ine 100%. Doing some psychological tests years ago, I found that I'm kind of have this kind of trait of constantly struggling and in doing things in my life. But even 2 hours ago, I was reading Seneca saying that he was suspicious of people that were striving, to use Ine's word, striving daily. Because although it's good to be capable of struggling and fighting, for those that make a life out of constant struggling, there is a problem there. So maybe we have adopted a personal narrative, me, Ine, and most probably many others close to us, a personal narrative of constant hardships and constant struggling. And maybe we need to let go and adopt more soft, more subtle, and maybe more, I would say, alternative ways like humor, as Ina said, embrace things in their softness and also their potency, because humor is extremely potent as well. And to keep on add something about this kind of radicality, activism, and this identity of the artist and curator as someone substituting for the lack of activism in other social and cultural spheres. Maybe this is also a little bit problematic. If we adopt this character for ourselves, it's like we are self-gratifying in this. We are kind of bringing the badges of honor. How many battles have I participated in? How many have you? It's like a understanding. These are our medals of honor. You are the performance artist that did this in Wall Street protest. You are the curator that did that in the Indignados era, etc., etc. So I'm bringing this also as a matter of as a point of a problematic point, I would say.
Maybe one last question to close, because we're close to the end. Also connected again, sorry, Ine, to you identifying as a disableism activist. I mean, and connected to what I just explained as maybe the problem that I see wanting to support diversity or to give people a stage and a voice. But who am I to speak for someone? Who are you to speak for certain groups? And what happens, I mean, I tried somehow to defend Renzo Martin's work, but hey, maybe he thinks, who is that guy to speak for me? So who are we to speak for others? Maybe that's the question. And when can this go wrong?
Very good question. And it's there every day for me, because who am I to? And especially we're now preparing a new exhibition called Come Alive, which is about eroticism as a life force, eroticism as a vitality that kind of, might help us come together again in terms of precarity, like in terms of uncertainty, in terms of existence. And it's so interesting because we're really giving it a lot of effort to reach out with artists and to reach out to different communities, different cultural backgrounds, etc. And the only thing that I'm interested in is going beyond the gatekeepers, because those gatekeepers, those people that think that they, with kind of all their trust that they do the right thing, talk for other people. Sorry?
My definition of a curator would be that you are a gatekeeper. So you are a gatekeeper.
No, actually, I do not agree here. In that book that you reference to, this Beyond Ethics and Aesthetics, the title, I wrote an article about curating, and curating can be that, how you define it. It can be that you think that you can speak for everybody, but it can also be a risk-taking adventure to allow other people to come in, to allow yourself, risk your own subjectivity, risk your own identity in order to meet the others halfway. You can do that. There are really different positions as curators there.
I think we could close this panel with your words and your definition of what a curator is and should do. I don't know, Poka, if you want to comment on it or...
I would like to throw a bomb because you just did it, you just provoked me, Arjon, with what you said. By embracing diversity and speaking about inclusivity in our work, we are failing to understand that we are behind what is coming. And what is coming is separatism. By working with these communities, I have been facing more and more times, although I believe I was an ally, I have been an ally, a natural ally to be more specific, that I'm not entitled to speak on their behalf first. And then when we moved even further in what we call diversity, I was facing, and I'm not only talking about artists and highbrow arts, I'm also talking about LGBTQ, for example, students in the school, that now they're more interested in separatism in their own communities, in which we, let's say, who is we? I mean, many people, the majority, is not included in what is their niche island. And this is something that will be very provoking us and challenging us on a personal and professional level in the future.
I completely agree there. I think it's a completely toxic development. But as I said earlier, we forget, that it is a context of social media, of like presenting yourself on Insta, the Twitter signs, etc. So it's actually almost the incapability of younger generations to be able to negotiate any other position. It's a problem. You do see, and they're called grassroots movement, where they then together on a campus or whatever, create those safe spaces in order to be able to hear and see each other. This is a big problem, and it's feeded on by the right wing, who's kind of, because as long as we fight each other, we don't come into action and become a collective civil disobedient force. And I think that is, so of course I believe in something. Well, that is what I believe in. We really need to show our human diversity in all ways, but in a fluent way and not in separatism.
I think, especially with the last few remarks, there's a lot of food for thought, and to continue discussion, I have a few questions for you, Ine, and for Poka, and I'm sure we will continue, and hopefully also the audience will continue the discussion. Our time, unfortunately, is up for now, and I would like to invite all of you to take a 15 minutes break from this conference. And in 5:45 Dutch time, so in 15 minutes from now, we'll be back with a keynote, or actually we'll call it a conversation, by Carolyn Christoph Bakargiev. And she will be with us for a program that is 45 minutes long, so 3/4 of an hour, a bit shorter than announced. That's the next session. For now, thanks a lot, Poka, thanks a lot, Ine, for a very inspiring discussion, debate, and I hope this debate will continue for the upcoming time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.